Hello, everyone. This is Volts for April 11th, 2025. What's up with clean energy in Finland? I'm your host, David Roberts. Finland is a Nordic country in the very north of Europe, with Sweden to its west and Russia to its east. Were it a U.S. state, it would rank 5th in size, just behind Montana, 23rd in population, just behind Minnesota, and 27th in GDP, just behind Louisiana. It is on roughly the same latitude as Alaska. Quietly, without getting nearly the attention of some other countries one could name, Finland has become a global leader in decarbonization. Already, nearly 95% of its electricity comes from carbon-neutral sources, led by nuclear power. In 2023, Finland opened its 5th nuclear power plant. Nuclear now provides close to 40% of the country's electricity. Wind, hydro, and biomass provide most of the rest. The country's government has adopted the extremely ambitious goal of full carbon neutrality by 2035, followed by carbon negativity. In 2022, it released a detailed climate and energy strategy. It was, not surprisingly, colored by concern over Russian aggression. Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, and Russian-Finnish relations remain fraught. Finland has got one of the most reliable energy grids in Europe, its own nuclear waste repository, and a whole bunch of district heating, all of which sounds very cool to me. So, to dig in and hear more about what's going on up there, I have with me today Helena Sarén, head of the Zero Carbon Future mission at Business Finland, and a longtime player in the clean energy scene there. We're going to get into all the country's successes on energy, what remains to be done, and what other countries might learn from the Finnish model. Without any further ado, Helena Sarén, welcome to Volts. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, David. It's a great pleasure to be here today with you.
So I'm looking here at this graph of Finnish electricity sources. Got nuclear around 38%, wind around 24%, hydro 17%, biomass 11%. That's a extremely clean mix relative to a lot of other countries. And so I thought we could start with just a little history. How long has all that nuclear power been around? And how long has all that wind been around? And what was powering Finland before all that stuff? Maybe give us just a little history of the kind of sustainable energy in Finland so far.
Finland is, we are not very rich in natural resources. So we do not have any oil or gas or coal of our own. We have plenty of forests, plenty of clean water, quite nice wind conditions, plenty of solar in the summertime, much less during the wintertime. And so that's about it. We are very pragmatic, I would say, as a country and a people. And we have recognized very early on that we have to build on the resources we do have and also be capable to have that kind of resilience no matter what happens in the world. And that has led us to have a very multiple energy mix. Decades and decades ago, it started pretty much with the biomass and hydro energy and that kind of stuff. And gradually we built nuclear power plants. And then during, I would say, last 10, 15 years, much more focus has been on renewables, namely especially wind energy and solar. And in wind energy, the situation is so that it's mainly onshore at the moment. A couple of turbines there in the sea, but offshore is coming strongly to the picture. And as well, we have also increase of solar. And as you stated, that there's a CO2 neutral electricity production is about 95% at the moment, which is pretty high. And the major increase has been taken place in the wind energy. At the moment, there is the pipeline of new wind energy projects, whether onshore or offshore, that could generate more electricity. That is the whole consumption at Finland at the moment.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, that's it's interesting because Finland, much like a lot of other countries, is trying to decarbonize and has realized that decarbonization comes mostly from electrification. So
Yes.
the actual electricity demand in Finland is going up, as it will be in many countries, electrifying. So you have this legislation that passed that set this goal of carbon neutrality, 2035. You have this strategy that comes out in 2022. Really fascinating strategy document. I read through most of it. I mean, it's quite extensive, but
it is extensive, yes.
You really get the sense of, like here in the US, I guess, everything that the government does is so controversial. Like in the US, you could propose cute puppies and 50% of the country would instantly hate cute puppies. But like, this just has the document has the feeling to me of like, we're not arguing about this anymore. We're just being practical. Like we all agree we need to do this. How should we do it? The pragmatism really comes through. It's quite refreshing. So maybe talk a little bit about what this legislation does and all the kind of sectoral roadmaps. Like how are those coming along?
Yeah. This is maybe a little bit longer story then. So as you stated, there is really, really ambitious targets. So carbon neutrality 2035 and carbon negative by 2050. And we have also stated that we phase out coal altogether by 2029.
Coal is now 1.5%
Yeah.
of your mix. Got to squeeze that last bit out.
Yeah, and most of the energy utilities actually are phasing, or have actually already phased out the coal, are going to do it well advanced, not on waiting until 2029, but they are doing it now. So that is also something I think phenomenal there, what is happening. So what our targets mean, all in all, that when we are thinking about CO2 emissions, so we should reduce the emissions by 2030, about 60%, and for 2040, 80% when we compare to the figures in 1990. So huge reductions.
Yeah, 2030 is not that far away.
No, it's not that far away. No, not really. And I would say that the reasoning there behind why we have reached such nice figures already by now and such nice reductions is mainly because our energy industry have invested a lot and they have done their share. Also, our industries are very committed. I'll get back to this soon. And there where we have challenges, which is pretty much the same in many other countries as well, is the transport and mobility.
Yeah.
Because it's so closely connected to our everyday lives. So how I take my kids to the hobbies and how I go to the office, etc., etc. So that is very, very difficult question in every country, also politically.
Yeah.
And then another story, which is also challenging, is this agricultural and forest sector. So this kind of land use sector. But I would say that the energy sector and industry sector, they have done a remarkable job already by now. One typical feature in Finland is that we are not a hierarchical country. So I could say that in a grocery store, I could bump up with a minister buying his or her groceries. I could go and talk with him or her. I could give a call to the ministries or even ministers if I have a telephone number. So and probably they would even pick up the call. So so in that way, it's easier to collaborate when we share the same target, and that means that all the bits and pieces in our authorities and ministries and so forth are running towards the same targets. So that's easier.
Would you say that across kind of politics, different parties and everything, are people mostly on board with this? Like, is this pretty popular? Is there any substantial political opposition to this?
I'll get back to you soon about this, but I want to say a couple of things still about our industry. You asked us about the roadmaps. And one good example of our collaboration and really all of us driving towards this same ambitious target is that 14 of our main industries created their low carbon roadmaps in 2020. And last year they renewed them. And that shows that all the industries in our society are very committed in this low carbon transition. And what was very late news was that about a couple of weeks ago, 200 Finnish companies signed Finlandia Declaration, and it was supported with our main industrial associations. And they had a delegation and met with our prime minister and said that please keep our ambitious targets alive.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, and we are committed to do our share and make the investments. And there were some very international companies which signed the declaration, like ABB, Wärtsilä, Veolia, Valmet, Kone. They are making the elevators and that kind of people movement equipment. So, I would say that our industries and businesses see that this is the only way for Finland is to renew and make new business out of decarbonization. And when now we go back to these political questions, and of course there are always debates here and there, probably not to the same extent that you are having, but a little bit milder.
Well, you're not cursed with a giant fossil fuel industry, so that does make things somewhat easier.
Yeah, that might be. Our present government, even though they probably had some different kind of opinions early on, but they are all now committed that this is now in the law and we are going to stick to that one. And I would say that the many parties also in the opposition, they are also supporting the targets because they were in the previous government which really put this law in force. So I would say it's pretty unanimous. But of course there are, when we're talking about windmills, it's not in my backyard effects. There are always...
you have that too.
Yes, it's everywhere, yeah. Probably people don't want to have the windmills in front of their summer cottage and when they are having the sauna and go to swim to the lake or the sea. So that's about it. But it is doable.
And I wonder, while we're on politics, let's just touch on it. Is the threat of Russia... Is Russia being right next door and Russia being so dominant in gas, that obviously shapes Finland's politics. And I wonder if that's part of the reason why there is so much agreement about this. Do you know what I mean? Like it's such an obvious national security issue. I wonder if that is part of the reason why everyone agrees.
Yeah, it's a huge national security issue. And from my personal point of view, if I may bring that to this table,
Please.
is that it's about, we got our independence in 1917, and then there were during the Second World War, we had a couple of wars with Russia. And from my personal family history, my mother's family had to flee. So we lost everything, so our home and everything, and the part of the country, it belongs now to Russia. And I have also 3 children and 2 boys, and they just were in the army because it's a must to do in Finland. All male have to go to the army.
Right. Everybody does a year?
Yeah, it depends. It can be minimum 6 months, but most they serve about 11 months. Yes.
Interesting.
Yes. So that kind of family history. But I want to here emphasize also that we don't have that kind of wish that we want to get that land back. So we think that's history, that's gone, and we have lived with that one and have great memories about earlier times on. So that is something. But Russia, yes, and like I said in the beginning, that we are very pragmatic people. So we have learned to live with we call them the big bear, they're next door. We have learned, but we have always been prepared. Mm-hmm. That's something what we have been always been doing. That's the reason why we joined the European Union. That's why we have been very much intensifying the collaboration with other Nordic countries. And that was one of the reasoning we also joined NATO.
Yeah. Finland spends more per capita on its military, I think, than any other European country.
Yes, that's true. And we have the largest artillery in the whole Western Europe. Just one tiny note here. So, but about Russian gas, yes. When the aggression towards Ukraine and the war in Ukraine started, we ended all the imports of Russian gas. We had, or still, the pipeline is still existing. There was a gas flowing directly from Russia especially to southern part of Finland, but we ended that pretty much after the war started.
And so that must involve then building some LNG import facilities if you're going to get it elsewhere.
Yeah, as an example, we are now importing LNG from USA. Then we also have the kind of a floating storage, which we share with Estonia, and that kind of reserves also and other sources of hydrocarbons.
And just to clarify, in the US, we use a lot of gas for electricity, but you guys do not. Gas is mostly an industry feedstock.
For industrial purposes, yes. And also what makes a huge difference when we compare Finland to, for instance, Central Europe, as this gas topic, I would say that it has much larger effects with the Central European countries, as there are many households, they are heated by gas and they are using this gas in households. But in Finland, it was very minimal. If I remember right, it was something only about 8,000 households.
Interesting.
So, I mean, it was a minority.
So if there's any impact, it's an impact on industry. It's just industry getting a feedstock from somewhere else.
Yes, but then on the other hand, it was probably easier to replace.
Right.
Because and many of those industries were not based along the gas pipeline, but they were, for instance, somewhere on the western coast, where they anyway had to take them to Finland by ships and so forth.
Interesting. So I want to get back to heating later, but first I want to talk a little bit about the grid. I am, this podcast and me personally, very devoted to grids, very in love with grids, clean grids, and much to my sort of delight when I started researching this, Finland has an extremely advanced and resilient and secure
and strong
electricity grid.
Yes.
So very few brownouts or blackouts, anything like that, like very good grid. So let's talk a little bit about how you run your grid. It is very much market-based. There's an pretty advanced energy market. Tell me a little bit of some other features of kind of like how you've built that grid up.
Yes, we have a national grid operator, well, surprisingly called FinGrid. And I really highly value the work, what they are doing, as they constantly are looking to the future. As if there is a huge amount of new renewables that needs to be linked to the grid, it might take with the licensing 6, 7, 8 years when it's constructed. So they have been already very much advanced, something like 10 years ago, started to build that kind of a capacities and had all that kind of in the pipeline, all the kind of construction work. So then our grid was ready when new windmills became operational. So that is one thing, to look into the future and have different kind of scenarios and so forth.
Smart.
Yes. And then additional thing is that we have been for decades been connected with other Nordics, and we are part of the electricity market called Nord Pool. And obviously that has been one of the backbone for our industrial, I would say, electrification, and also our society to electrify and also to develop. Because we have been able to utilize also Norwegian hydropower, and sometimes when we have also excess electricity, we could sell it to Sweden or Norway or even Denmark. And now we have also other grid connection to the Baltic states. So I would say that has been a very, very good move.
And this is a market with spot pricing.
Yes.
That varies by time and location, just sort of like location and time-sensitive pricing that we're struggling to get
Yes.
over here. It's fully in place there. There's lots of models for distributed energy sources feeding into the grid. There's a lot of advanced thinking about that. But then also these energy communities. I was very intrigued by that. Tell me a little bit about the thinking there.
Yeah, if I may still go back a little bit about this grid,
Please,
a couple of features there. And like you very nicely said that it's spot priced, and it has gone so far that I, as a consumer, I myself, for instance, I'm buying a spot priced electricity. So it varies on an hourly basis. And we have had in Finland, in every household, about 20 years, smart meters. So every household has had a smart meter. And probably it's now already fourth or fifth generation of smart meters, which has been the rollout. And in a couple of years' time, it's going to be like in a 15-minute interval.
Interesting.
Yes, smart metering. So that means that we can all the time optimize the network and the consumption and everything. That is one of the reasons I would say that the market prices for consumers, and of course then for the industries as well, has been one of the lowest within Europe.
Yeah. I meant to mention that not only is this a very sophisticated grid and a very reliable grid, but you have cheap electricity, some of the cheapest electricity in the EU.
Yeah, that's true. And as an example, in my own house, it's kind of one family house with 5 bedrooms, so just to give the scale. Last year, the electricity bill was about 1,500 euros, which is about the same thing in US dollars. And that includes the electricity as such, but also electricity for the heating. And take into account that we have a pretty cold 5-6 months here. So I think it's very reasonable pricing, I would say.
Well, also, when you have all that wind down the coast and all the wind is blowing at once, you get something we get, in some individual states here sometimes, which is basically free electricity.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Electricity that's zero or even lower.
Yeah, and it was this Saturday, so now this is Monday, so last Saturday, we had a negative price. So actually, when I was consuming electricity, I got paid for that one.
So tell me about these energy communities. What's the sort of idea, thinking behind them?
Energy communities, I find a very fascinating concept, as you mentioned as well. So a couple of them with what I'm more familiar, I would say, it's like individual energy grid, or in other words, a kind of community.
Microgrid is the...
Microgrid would be probably the right, not mini grid, but microgrid one might be the right wording for that one. And there are like energy generators. There might be like a solar panel field. There might be then storage solutions there. There might be some kind of hydrogen solutions there. And then you combine it also with the heating and cooling. So some of these energy communities are located, for instance, closely to shopping malls where is excess heat, and they can just put the excess heat then and it can be utilized somewhere else, for instance, in the process industry or heating the greenhouses or something like that one. So it's like a community where are the generators, the producers, the off-takers, they have jointly created that kind of microgrid, but it includes quite often electricity and the heating as well.
Yeah, and I think the idea here is that these communities are to some degree self-sufficient, can be islanded off from the larger grid, and
that's true.
So this is a grid architecture. Cool grid architecture thing that I've done many pods on, like a bottom up grid. Finland's at work on that.
Yes, and many of them have also connections to this FinGridsnet, just in case. But like you said, that they are self-sufficient, and some of the new residential areas, if they are not very closely linked to the main grid lines, so they might have an opportunity. I want to go and take this kind of energy community viewpoint. Yeah.
Love that stuff. So let's talk now about nuclear power. So it's sort of funny. I didn't know before going into this that Finland had so much nuclear power. And it's sort of like anytime in the US context you hear about nuclear power, it is an incredible, loud angry controversy, and B, very little nuclear power results from it's mostly controversy and very little actual power. And it looks like in Finland, you've gone the opposite way. Lots of power, not that much controversy. I mean, in the US, this question of how to build nuclear power plants on time and on budget is apparently a problem that we just cannot solve. And it sounds like it works in Finland. So I'm just like, is it what it looks like from the outside? Are these popular? Is there any controversy around nuclear power? And how are you building them on budget? Because we can't seem to figure that out.
Oh, the budgetary question, that is a tricky one. Yeah, but if I go back about some decades, maybe I would say 70s, 80s, and this is a good example, as at the time, especially the Green Party, like there was a huge green movement also in other parts of Europe, they were opposing heavily the nuclear power. But some years back, here in Finland, the Green Party said that they are supporting the nuclear power because it's clean.
Oh, interesting. So you took a very different path than Germany, for instance.
Yes, they had the Energiewende and they have had now some challenges, I would put it that way now because I mean the Russian gas and everything there. So it's an industry definitely needs lots of electricity. So yeah, that's a little bit different kind of attitude, and that probably comes back to this pragmatic viewpoint. So we see it very strongly that it's a clean energy, and in order to make the decarbonization before all the other probably technologies and solutions are going, that we have them enough there. So during the time, we probably need nuclear power. And as an example, in Europe, for instance, France is sharing the same kind of a viewpoint. And so other countries are doing a little bit different ways.
So one fascinating aspect of this, so you just had this new nuclear plant open up, was it last year before? Which was actually the third reactor on that site.
Yes.
Which is all on this one little island. And now you're in a situation where this one little island is providing 30% of Finland's electricity because it's got these 3 nuclear reactors on it. Pretty amazing. And on that island, and I'd love to hear a little bit about this, you have on-site waste management. This is something else that is like endlessly controversial in the US. We can't seem to find a place to put our waste permanently, so it's just being stored on site, and we fight and fight and fight about it. So on this island, though, you have, so it's sort of like self-contained. No, all the waste just gets buried on site. Talk a little bit about how that came about.
Oh, yeah. Of course, when we are talking about the nuclear power, then the burning question is about what to do with the nuclear waste, because it's radioactive for a pretty long time. And we started to plan and build a deep cave. I might say that might be the right wording. It's in Finnish. We say it onkalo, which means that wording means like a deep cave might be a right translation for that one. Goes several hundred meters. I'm not quite sure, maybe kilometers. Several hundred meters in depth there, and have a different kind of holes there. So I mean, you can have the radioactive waste then and securely and safely be deposited forever then. So, but that one of the good points here is that the ground, it's mainly graphite, so it's very stable. We don't have any earthquakes and so forth, so it's safe to put it there, because in some parts of the world you cannot put. So we have very safe earth crust here, so you can have it. And that was already started the planning when we had our first nuclear power plants. So already we had to start and find out what would be technological solutions for depositing them for us then till the end. So that was one of the.
Nuclear is now up to about 40% of power. I know there's a lot of research going on around SMRs, around small modular reactors. Is there a big push for more nuclear? Like, is that sector still expanding, would you say?
I would say that it is. And even though there was a time in the world, maybe it was Fukushimas and others, what happened. So nuclear power was not that popular. So during these decades, we still kept in Finland the research and development running. So we didn't close that track of research and development, never. So some of the largest energy companies in Finland have recently stated that they are doing the calculations about whether there should be some new nuclear power plants. And now we are talking about this large size, because after a decade or so, some of them will be closed down because they are at the end of their life cycle. So what will happen then? So they are making the calculation, but obviously then it's huge investment.
Yeah.
So they need to make the calculations for that one. But the SMRs is very interesting, and energy utilities, some of them have stated also in Finland, they want to are ready to invest in those to also to produce the heat for our district heating network. So that is a highly interesting area, not only in Finland, but more largely also in European Union. And by the way, we have also the memorandum of understanding with the USA about the nuclear collaboration.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, we've been talking about SMRs forever in the US, but maybe pragmatic Finland can actually build some. Let's talk about wood then. This is a bit of a controversial subject in a lot of places. So Finland is sort of legendarily covered with forest. Use a lot of wood in electricity via biomass for electricity, and these district energy systems, which are all over Finland, mostly, as I understand it, run on wood chips, also run on wood. So, in a lot, and certainly in the US, like the whole question of whether wood forestry is actually zero carbon is very controversial. So I wonder, is it also controversial there in Finland? Like, how is wood largely viewed as a sustainable source there, or are there fights about forestry and about how to calculate carbon uptake and all this kind of stuff? Are forests controversial there too? Hey there, everybody. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell you about a new mattress or push a credit card on you. This isn't an ad. There are no ads on Volts. It is supported entirely by listeners like you. If you'll indulge me for a second, I'd like to ask for your support. I started Volts because we're all surrounded by depressing news about climate change and misinformation about clean energy, and it's never been more important to share the stories of the real people on the ground doing the real work of transition, and all the ingenuity and courage and public spirit they are bringing to it. People are hungry to hear these stories, to learn from and find inspiration in them. I've heard from people who change majors or careers after hearing episodes of Volts, people using it in classrooms and community groups, even state legislators who have passed bills inspired by specific episodes. Sharing these stories matters. It makes a difference. If you have found value in it and want to help me continue doing it, I hope you will join the community of paid subscribers at volts.wtf. It's about the cost of a cup of coffee a month. If you don't like subscriptions, you can make a one-time contribution, leave a review on Apple or Spotify, or just tell a friend about Volts. I am grateful for any and all support. If you're already a paid subscriber, thank you. And now, back to the show. Is wood largely viewed as a sustainable source there, or are there fights about forestry and about how to calculate carbon uptake and all this kind of stuff? Are forests controversial there too?
Yeah, the calculation has been quite a lot on the table recently, as it seems to be that, for instance, we are calculating in a different way than Sweden is. So I think that personally that we should have a unanimous way of calculating within the European Union in order to be able to, compare the situation in different countries.
Well, you are in a shared carbon market, right? So, like, you should have shared measurements of wood.
Yeah. But all in all, I would say that we see it as a very sustainable, and we also take very seriously the forestry and how we take care of our forests. because it has been pretty much the bread and butter, the forest-related industries for Finland already from our independence, beginning of our independence time.
Yeah.
So it's something that's very, very close to our hearts. And it's pretty much in the national DNA, I would say. I would put it also in that way. But the principle is that we are always taking less from the forests than it's the annual growth. That is principle number one, I would say. And then for what purpose we want to use it, it's mostly on value-added products. So it could be like a construction of the houses or something else, but use the wood for more value-add products.
Right.
And when we are using it as a bioenergy, we are mainly using forest residuals, stumps from the forest, etc., which don't have other value.
Right.
So we are not like putting the finest logs there to the oven, so to say.
And I saw actually an article that said that recent measurements show that Finland's forest has actually become a net carbon producer.
Yes.
Recently, I think that has something to do with increased logging, but also, your electricity sector is growing, your population is growing, so it looks like there's going to be more wood needed in the future, especially if you're going to try to get away from all fossil fuels. So how are you thinking about that? Because you're already the forests are, obviously in a tender state, and you're gonna need more wood going forward.
Yeah, and now I go back a little bit about this calculation and that the differences here, how do you calculate, and that's been quite a lot of debate how you should calculate or whether you should do this and that and so forth. So yes, the most recent calculations show that they are not become like they are not like carbon sinks, but they are actually releasing more CO2 than they are taking. But let's leave the researchers to take care of the calculations. But one of the reasons why there has been more, we have taken now utilized now more forests now is that we don't have any imports from Russia, because they were used to import a lot of forest products and logs and everything from Russia, and obviously not now. But still, I would emphasize here that we are taking care of the forest, and we are still taking less than they are annually growing. So that is very, 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 very crucial. And I think we are most forested country in the Western Europe. So that's really, really something. Yeah.
Are there any efforts underway to move district energy systems to different heat sources?
Oh yeah, that was the other part of the question. I already forgot that one. Yeah. So yeah.
And if so, what? Like what are the alternate heat sources?
Yeah, onto the electrification. So there are like a huge water boilers where the energy companies have invested in. So when the prices are low of the electricity, they heat the water.
Right.
So that is something what they are doing. Different kind of energy storage solutions. Very interesting. There's a new company which has studied and made research and have developed a sand battery. So there are new kind of solutions coming. And then as a very interesting, I would say, information is that in Helsinki, under Helsinki, as we have this very, very solid ground there are these huge, large caves where some of them are filled with water. And when we have an excess heat, they drive the excess heat there, and then they can utilize it later on. So there are different kind of solutions, but I would say that utilizing the electricity, for instance, these large water boilers as such, those are going on. So some investments, yes, are related to bioenergy, but I would say that we see more and more of these new kind of solutions where you can store the heat, or then you can utilize the electricity.
Well, one thing I didn't see come up at all, which puzzled me a little bit, was geothermal. So in the U.S., there's both deep geothermal that can do electricity, which is now, very far technologically developed from what it used to be. You can do it now in areas that don't have natural volcanic activity with enhanced geothermal. And then there's also, in the U.S. Popping up in more and more places. These district energy systems that are just using boreholes, just these sort of it's kind of shallow boreholes to get that shallow heat from the earth. Is there any talk about geothermal in Finland?
Yes. Oh yes. Oh yes.
Good. We love geothermal. Everybody loves geothermal.
Yeah. There was one test drill hole, something going down to some 5 kilometers or so, and they tested it for some years, but it wasn't too successful. Then now they closed it down. But anyway, I think it shows that such a good development is going on and research is going on. Many houses are utilizing this geothermal for their own purposes. So then it's drilled to something like 100 meters or 200 meters or something like that one. But there is more and more development, and also the energy utilities are utilizing this kind of mid-sized geothermal, which is then maybe some kilometers, but not going to 35 or so. So yes, it is part of the mix as well.
Let's talk about, one of the things I did a pod on recently is the sort of role that urban design plays in decarbonization. So that's everything from sort of the buildings themselves to roads and transportation, walkability, bikeability, all this kind of stuff. Is that playing a big role here in Finland? Does that get a lot of sort of attention, just this kind of urban fabric itself? I mean, you only have one big city, so...
well, that's true. And it's not that big either. But yes, the urban planning, I would say that it has been, for decades, integral part of the cities and municipalities when they are planning this kind of development plans, what they are doing. And in Finland, it includes a lot of activation of public and people who are living in the area. So because the kind of public acceptance is very crucial. Another phenomenon here I think that they try to integrate different parts of the society when they are doing the urban planning, for instance, having enough of this kind of recreational areas and forests and parks, etc., so people can spend their free time. For instance, in this capital area, they are jointly planning the transportation and mobility solutions, not only in the Helsinki, which is the capital, but the surrounding cities. So they are everybody is not making only their individual solutions, but trying to think how we as people are moving around, because we are going cross city. I mean, this kind of from city to another city to other city.
Is there a big push for more public transit? Because, when it comes to transportation decarbonization, there's basically two big levers. One is you can electrify your vehicles, which I know is underway in Finland, and the other way is just to get people to drive less. So it's
Public transportation is something that has been I could say always here, and that's why probably I didn't bring it up, because I thought it was so self-evident that it is existing, but now I'm thinking about from your perspective, it's probably not.
Yes, I know. We do not take it for granted, let's just say.
Yes, so we take it very much for granted. So like in capital area, there are buses going, there are trains going, and they are all the time thinking about from logistical point of view. So, okay, if I take the bus and then I have to take to the train, so these are all these logistics are working smoothly. And I would say also that it's very nicely priced. So it's also good from that perspective.
It's popular. And are there, it's cold there, as I'm sure you're well aware. Yeah. Is there a big push to retrofit existing buildings to improve their performance? Or were they built well in the first place, which would be a whole...
Many were built. I would say that all the houses, like we have 3 glasses. I mean...
Triple pane glass, yeah.
Yes, that's the right wording, that one. But yes, there are these kind of rules, what you should... And the legislation has become stricter and stricter. It has developed to that direction. And also like new buildings, the official buildings should have, for instance, solar panels on the rooftops. So that kind of things. They are proceeding, and gradually houses are retrofitted. Yes, but I would say that all in all, they are built already quite nicely. Then already from a decades back. But whenever there is a kind of retrofitting taking place, so naturally they put extra insulation to the walls and to the roof, especially the roof is very important. So that takes place, yes.
And then actually, you mentioned solar. I meant to discuss solar earlier. So right now, solar is a pretty tiny sliver of the electricity mix. It's 1.4%.
Yeah.
I think probably people who don't know anything about Finland or just guess from its latitude that it's not that sunny. Is there big potential for solar there? Is there a big push to put solar on, not just solar fields, but solar rooftops? Like, is that growing? Is the solar piece of the pie, is that growing right now?
It is growing, not only the solar plants, as you mentioned, but individual households are investing a lot on solar panels. And I would say that roughly, at least in southern Finland, you get electricity nicely at about 8 months a year, at least.
How long is that dark winter?
Yeah. Gradually, after the darkest months, you start to get some solar. But then during the summertime, I mean, it's like 22 hours a day sunny. So
true.
So it depends. And then also people can sell their excess electricity also back to the grid.
Right.
So that is one additional point here. But yes, it's growing fast. And some years back, there was from governmental that kind of a support or aid that when people were putting the solar panels or they were exchanging their oil-driven heating systems. So you got a minor support for that one, but it was minor. So, but anyway.
So I wanted to ask about data centers. So this is an interesting, as I'm sure you're aware, the whole situation around data centers has changed quite rapidly in recent years. They want lots more of them. There's a big push on to build them all over the US. And I know you have a couple of big data centers in Finland that you're proud of. They're using their excess heat for district heating systems,
yes.
all very cool, very well integrated. So I'm wondering, like, given Finland's stability, particularly the stability of its grid and the cleanness of its grid, it seems like all these big companies that want data centers would be knocking down your door to get in there. Is there a big push to build more data centers in Finland?
Yes, there's a big push, I would say.
And like, is there such a thing as too much of a, you know what I mean? Like, this is some states in the U.S. are worried about, like, is there such a thing as too much of a good thing? Are you worried at all that you're going to get too many data centers, they're going to dominate the electricity system, et cetera? Like, how do you think about data centers?
Yeah, that's a discussion is going on. And like you mentioned, a couple of big players, large players like Google and Microsoft have already invested here. And Google is making additional investments. So yes, they have been here quite a long time and see this as, I would say, the grid is good, cool climate is good for the data centers. And again, also they can do this kind of a societal good also when they can get rid of nicely of this excess heat, either for the district heating and cooling. It could be also utilized for instance, in sawmills, in drying wood or somewhere in a greenhouses. But yes, there's a discussion going on how, for instance, how flexible the data centers are, or are or they should become probably more flexible. And I would see as an interesting development that maybe jointly we could develop something related to AI, some kind of competence development around the data center. So it would not just be using the word just being a data center, but building some additional competencies around that one. So that might be an interesting thing to do. But yes, there is a push and lots of interest towards Finland about the data centers. But like you said, probably there is some kind of a balancing that I would love to see, yes, we need to have, and it's good that we have the data centers, but I would love to see also other like industrial renewable investments taking place, which are then a different kind of a business, and then we wouldn't be too biased on and solely on one area of expertise, and would then from that perspective be more competitive as a country.
You still need that balance. Let's talk briefly about hydrogen. I was a little puzzled reading around about this. Like when I look at your energy system, I don't totally see where you need hydrogen. And yet there's tons and tons of hype about it and activity and research and development projects. So why all this enthusiasm for hydrogen?
Yeah, there are several end usages where you can actually use it, or you can use it also there in between as an intermediate. But it's very crucial source for instance, steel industry. When they want to get in the processes, want to get rid of some fossil fuels. So you can use also hydrogen there. And there are a couple of, in Finland and Sweden, a couple of large steel factories. And if they change into hydrogen, it's a huge emission reduction. So that is one end source that you can use it. Then obviously, the hydrogen could be also as one form of energy storage as such. But where I would like to see much more emphasis and collaboration and development is that how we could utilize hydrogen together, for instance, with nitrogen or together with the carbon. And you could take the carbon capture, for instance, from the industries and make new fuels. So practically same kind of hydrocarbons that you are now having as a natural gas. You can use it, they make it from other sources as well.
Yeah.
So new kind of fuels. So whether we are talking about methanol, whether we are talking about ammonia, which is also a good source for fertilizers. And at the moment, quite a lot of fertilizers to the world comes, for instance, from Russia. And fertilizers are also very expensive at the moment. So that would be also one additional end product. But then when we think even more, I would love to see this hydrogen economy evolve to that kind of producing new kind of a non-fossil based chemicals, materials, and even food. And now I want to mention one very, very great and exciting example, and it's called solar foods.
Solar foods,
and it makes actually food out of thin air, so carbon capturing and so forth. And actually they are there in shortlisted and have a connections and agreement with NASA, because when you are sending the astronauts somewhere to Mars, you have to produce food, and then you could produce it.
Right.
For instance, when people are producing CO2. So I mean, really, you could make food out of that one as well.
Interesting. So this is more of a play to just be part of the international hydrogen economy more than just specifically making it for yourself.
Yes. And I see it as one crucial ingredient for our industrial renewable. And I would like us to build new industries with partners based on hydrogen economy and more value-added products, and not to be like you mentioned, like a sole H2 producer, because it's then more like a pulp and paper producer. It's like a basic, and somebody else makes the real business out of that one.
Higher up the value chain. Yeah. Speaking of that, the last thing I wanted to ask you about is what I really had no idea about and was really fascinated to learn is that in terms of speaking of natural resources, Finland has all the materials for batteries. These are, this is becoming a bigger and bigger subject where you source the sort of materials for batteries. There's a lot of sources that are, socially or economically not that great. And this is potentially, I don't have to tell you the whole battery world, the whole battery market is rapidly expanding. So, but then again, when you're just mining materials, you're there on the low end of that value chain. So sort of how do you think about Finland's role in the battery world, battery industry?
Yeah, we are actually a mining country of European Union, and we have especially nickel and cobalt here, a little bit gold and something else, but especially nickel and cobalt, which are obviously important in the battery.
And wasn't there a big lithium deposit discovered somewhere?
Yes, sorry, I forgot that one. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's true, and I would like us to have here also the industrial plants which are processing these raw materials at least a little bit further. And there is now new announcements, some investments about some cathode material or some kind of things what they are needing in the battery industry. So definitely that is an area. So not just to dig out these valuable earth minerals and then ship them somewhere else. So definitely that is an area, and there we need collaboration, and we also need foreign investors.
Do you have any battery manufacturers yet, or is that all just kind of coming together?
It's not the whole package, parts.
This has all been super fascinating, Helena. It's just so much to learn. So much I didn't know about Finland, and it's really, like, from an energy perspective, fascinating. Oh, the one other fact I learned about Finland that I wanted to get in here somewhere, I didn't even know where to put it, but lots of countries are worried about rising sea levels. I found out that Finland, the opposite is happening. Finland is rising out of the sea because, it spent centuries underneath these heavy glaciers.
Yeah.
And now it's literally rising up out of the sea. So, that's at least one thing you don't have to worry about.
Yeah, but the ground is rising there a little bit north of the middle central of Finland, but probably the capital area has a little bit challenges with the rising sea levels, but not that bad as in many other areas. Yes.
All right. Well, Helena, thank you for coming on. Thank you for all your time, and this has been really fascinating.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Volts. It takes a village to make this podcast work. Shout out especially to my super producer, Kyle McDonald, who makes me and my guests sound smart every week. And it is all supported entirely by listeners like you. So if you value conversations like this, please consider joining our community of paid subscribers at volts.wtf, or leaving a nice review, or telling a friend about Volts, or all three. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.